Rashonda Cade. This is Reading with Rashonda. We are reading Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom by William and Ellen Craft. We are on part 2, video 3. Let's dive in. Our old masters, having heard how their agents were treated at Boston, wrote to Mr. Fillmore, who was then president of the States, to know what he could do to have us sent back to slavery. Mr. Fillmore said that we should be returned. He gave instructions for military force to be sent to Boston to assist the officers in making the arrest. Gracious, they got the president involved? Therefore, we, as well as our friends, among whom was George Thompson, Esquire, late MP for the Tower Hamlets, the slave's long-tried, self-sacrificing friend and eloquent advocate, thought it best at any sacrifice to leave the mock-free republic, not real free, mock-free, to leave the mock-free republic and come to a country where we and our dear little ones can be truly free. No one daring to molest us or make us afraid. But as the officers were watching every vessel that left the port to prevent us from escaping, we had to take the expensive and tedious overland route to Halifax. We shall always cherish the deepest feelings of gratitude to the Vigilance Committee of Boston, upon which were many of the leading abolitionists, and also to our numerous friends for the very kind and noble manner in which they assisted us to preserve our liberties and to escape from Boston, as it were like Lot from Sodom to a place of refuge, and finally to this truly free and glorious country. So the truly free and glorious country they're escaping to is England, and that just makes me sad that I'm just seeing this glare in my glasses. That makes me sad that a place that is the land of the free and the home of the brave needs to be escaped from to a land that is truly free and glorious. But I'll continue. Where no tyrant, let his power be ever so absolute over his poor trembling victims at home, dare come and lay violent hands upon us or upon our dear little boys who have the good fortune to be born upon British soil. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being born on British soil. I'm not saying that, but just like, aw, you were like, yes, they weren't born in America. That makes me sad. And reduce us to the legal level of the beast that perisheth. Oh, may God bless the thousands of unflinching, disinterested abolitionists of America who are laboring through evil as well as through good report to cleanse their country's escutcheon. To cleanse their country's escutcheon from the foul and destructive blot of slavery, and to restore to every bondman his God-given rights, and may God ever smile upon England and upon England's good, much beloved and deservedly honored queen, for the generous protection that is given to unfortunate refugees of every rank and of every color and clime. On the passing of a fugitive slave bill, the following learned doctors, as well as a host of lesser traders, came out strongly in its offense. I'm sorry. On the passing of the Fugitive Slave Bill, the following learned doctors, as well as a host of lesser traders, they're all traders, but to what degree are they traders? Wow. Came out strongly in its defense. And I think I said offense last time, in its defense. The Reverend Gardiner Spring, an eminent Presbyterian clergyman of New York, well known in this country by his religious publications, declared from the pulpit that if by one prayer he could liberate every slave in the world, he would not dare to offer it. Jesus does not love that. The Reverend Dr. Joel Parker of Philadelphia, in the course of a discussion on the nature of slavery, says, "What then are the evils inseparable from slavery? There is not one that is not equally inseparable from depraved human nature and other lawful relations." The Reverend Moses Stewart, D.D., late professor in the Theological College of Andover, in his vindication of this bill, reminds his readers that many Southern slaveholders are true Christians, that sending back a fugitive to them is not like restoring one to an idolatrous people, that though we may pity the fugitive, yet the Mosaic law does not authorize the rejection of the claims of the slaveholders to their stolen or strayed property. Okay. I don't believe that's what the Bible is saying, but let's even say, sure, the Bible is saying return this property, but the Bible doesn't say people should be property. People should not be property. People should not be property. The Reverend Dr. Spencer of Brooklyn, New York, has come forward in support of the Fugitive Slave Bill by publishing a sermon entitled "The Religious Duty of Obedience to the Laws," which has elicited the highest encomiums from Dr. Samuel H. Cox, the Presbyterian minister of Brooklyn, notorious both in this country and America for his sympathy with the slaveholder. The Reverend W.M. Rogers, an Orthodox minister of Boston, delivered a sermon in which he says, "When the slave asks me to stand between him and his master, what does he ask? He asks me to murder a nation's life, and I will not do it because I have a conscience, because there is a God." Let's read that again. When the slave asks me to stand between him and his master, what does he ask? He asks me to murder a nation's life. So apparently this Reverend W.M. Rogers of Boston understands that the U.S. is built on the backs of slaves and that slavery was the nation's lifeblood, because he says to keep a slave from his master is to murder a nation's life. I mean, I guess he's not wrong, but that's not right. You can be not wrong. Sorry, I got stuff falling down over here, but that doesn't mean you're right. He proceeds to affirm that if resistance to the carrying out of the fugitive slave law should lead to the magistracy to call the citizens to arm, their duty was to obey, and if ordered to take human life in the name of God, to take it. And he concludes by admonishing the fugitives to hearken to the word of God and to count their own masters worthy of all honor. The Reverend William Kroll of Waterfield, State of Maine, printed a Thanksgiving sermon of the same kind, in which he calls upon his hearers not to allow excessive sympathies for a few hundred fugitives to blind them so that they may risk increased suffering to the millions already in chains. The Reverend Dr. Taylor, an Episcopal clergyman of New Haven, Connecticut, made a speech at a union meeting in which he deprecates the agitation on the law and urges obedience to it, asking, "Is that article in the Constitution contrary to the law of nature, of nations, or to the will of God? Is it so? Is there a shadow of reason for saying it? I have not been able to discover it. Have I not sworn you it is lawful to deliver up, in compliance with the laws, fugitive slaves for the high, the great, the momentous interests of the Southern states?" The Right Reverend Bishop Hopkins of Vermont, in a lecture at Lockport, says, "It was warranted by the Old Testament," and inquires, "What effect had the gospel in doing away with slavery?" None whatever. Therefore, he argues, as it is expressly permitted by the Bible, it does not in itself involve any sin, but that every Christian is authorized by the divine law to own slaves, provided they were not treated with unnecessary cruelty. The Reverend Orville Dewey, D.D., of the Unitarian Connection, maintained in his lectures that the safety of the Union is not to be hazarded for the sake of the African race. He declares that, for his part, he would send his own brother or child into slavery if needed to preserve the Union between the free and the slaveholding states. That's a lie. I mean, he might have said it, but nobody is going to be like, yeah, I'll send my family, my brother, my kids into slavery if that's what I need to do to preserve the Union. There is not one person ever who said that and meant it. Maybe people said it. Nobody meant that. And counseling the slave to similar magnanimity thus exhorts him, your right to be free is not absolute, unqualified, irrespective of all consequences. Your right to be free, so he's saying this to slaves, your right to be free is not absolute, unqualified, irrespective of all consequences. I'm sure he thought his right as a land-holding white man to be free was indeed absolute, unqualified, and irrespective of all consequences. But he didn't think my right to be free. And I feel like, okay, when was this written? 1858? When did we say? I don't remember. They escaped in 1848. It's 2020, and we're still arguing about people's right to be free. Is their right to be free absolute, unqualified, and irrespective of all consequences? I do have a right to be free. I'm not saying your right to freedom means you can do whatever you want. There are laws and just being a good person that should prevent us from doing some things. But I'm talking about and they're talking about here too, the basic right to be free, the right to not be owned by somebody. We're not talking about the right to bear arms, the right to do the right to vote. We're talking very specifically about the right not to be owned by somebody else. Whew. All right, I'll keep reading. If my espousal of your claim is likely to involve your race and mine together in disasters infinitely greater than your personal servitude, then you ought not to be free. In such a case, personal rights ought to be sacrificed to the general good. You yourself ought to see this and be willing to suffer for a while, one for many. Yeah, as long as the one is suffering is you and not me. If the doctor is prepared, he is quite at liberty to sacrifice his personal rights to the general good. But as I have suffered a long time in slavery, it is hardly fair for the doctor to advise me to go back. According to his showing, he ought rather to take my place. That would be practically carrying out his logic as respects suffering a while, one for many. In fact, so eager were they to prostrate themselves before the great idol of slavery, and like Balaam to curse instead of blessing the people whom God had brought out of bondage, that they bring up obsolete passages from the Old Testament to justify their downward course, overlooked or would not see the following verses, which show very clearly, according to the doctor's own textbook, that the slaves have a right to run away and that it is unscriptural for anyone to send them back. In the 23rd chapter of Deuteronomy, 15th and 16th verses, it is thus written, Thou shalt not deliver unto his master the servant which is escaped from his master unto thee. He shall dwell with thee, even among you, in that place which he shall choose in one of thy gates, where it liketh him best. Thou shalt not oppress him. Hide the outcast, bewray not him that wandereth. Let mine outcasts dwell with thee. Be thou a covert to them from the face of the spoiler. Isaiah 16, 3 and 4. The great majority of the American ministers are not content with uttering sentences similar to the above, or remaining wholly indifferent to the cries of the poor bondman, but they do all they can to blast the reputation and to muzzle the mouths of the few good men who dare to beseech the God of mercy to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and let the oppressed go free. These reverend gentlemen pour a terrible cannonade upon Jonah for refusing to carry God's message against Nineveh and tell us about the whale in which he was entombed, while they utterly overlook the existence of the whales which trouble their republican waters, and know not that they themselves are the Jonahs who threaten to sink their ship of state by steering in an unrighteous direction. We are told that the whale vomited up the runaway prophet. This would not have seemed so strange had it been one of the above lukewarm doctors of divinity whom he had swallowed, for even a whale might find such a morsel difficult of digestion. Let's stop there. So we are reading Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom by William and Ellen Craft. This is Reading with Rashonda, and I'm Rashonda Cade.